Hey, how's everyone doing? It's the day before the AP test, so everyone is probably furiously cramming. Yee, that's my sweet spot. That's where I thrive. So today is an AMA, Ask Me Anything. I've been getting a ton of questions um, through Instagram, through messaging, through the story I posted yesterday. I've compiled like a very long list of a lot of common questions I've been getting. And so I am going to walk us through those. So I'm going to give everyone kind of a minute to get set up, say hi in the chat. Oh, wow, I guess Heimler's still going and some people are watching us at the same time. That would make my brain explode. You left Heimler to come here. I'm so, wow, that's high praise. That's very exciting. Heimler is amazing, by the way. We've been chatting this week. We're going to do some collaboration at some point, which is very, very exciting. So, cool. And so for those of you who are maybe new to me or new to my YouTube page, as a lot of you are, my name is Emily. I am an AP World History teacher in Austin, Texas, and I also have a podcast and website called Anti-Social Studies. So if you want any of the resources that I will maybe talk about, you can go to my website, antisocialstudies.org, and you'll be able to find a lot of review materials, practice DBQs, all that stuff. This AMA will be posted on my YouTube later. So if you want to go back and look at anything, and I'm working off of a document that I've made where I've been kind of keeping track of the questions I've been getting and then kind of my answers. So I will be posting that on my website as well. So I'm going to go through these verbally because it's just so much easier to answer these questions. But just know I have a document where I am keeping track of the questions and the answers I'm giving. And so I'll be sharing that on my website, antisocialstudies.org. So if you missed something or you want to go back and look again, you'll be able to access that right after this session. Okay, so feel free to use the chat. I'll be honest, it's kind of hard for me to like monitor the chat as well as I would like to. And so, so with that, like use the chat if you can. A lot of times people will be answering each other's questions in the chat, which is amazing. So if you see someone asking a question and you know the answer to it, please put it in there. Here's the deal for me. I'm gonna walk through the questions I've been getting kind of in the order of how you will approach them in the essay. So I'm going to start with like some general stuff and start with like what notes and materials you can have. Then I'm going to answer questions I've been getting about the prompts. Then I'll answer questions about like thesis and context using the documents, evidence and HIP, and then kind of any last minute stuff. So please wait, right? If you have a question about outside evidence, which everyone does for some reason, wait, I'm going to get there. I want to kind of go in order and have this be a little bit organized. So I'm going to start with like what you will see kind of before the DBQ even starts, and then we will get there, I promise. So just stick with me. Everyone's already asking a lot of questions, which I tell you I'm going to get there. Don't worry. A lot of people, here's the deal. There's a few things I can get out of the way. How many paragraphs does it need to be? It literally doesn't matter. 1 or 10, it literally doesn't matter. How many sentences? It literally doesn't matter. Like, just answer the prompt. How many paragraphs? How many body paragraphs? Doesn't matter, right? Like none of this. There is no point for formatting. There's no point for grammar. There's no point for spelling. There's no point for similes. Please God, don't use similes. Do not worry about this essay being like a well-written essay. It does not need to be. And in fact, it sometimes just gets in the way. Historians just want like, I'm a historian and I'm like, just tell me what you're going to tell me and then like prove it and then move on, right? Like this does not need to be pretty. Think of this as your first draft. So every question that you have about formatting, about spelling, about paragraphs, about whatever, it's the same answer. It literally doesn't matter, right? So we'll get more to that in a little bit, but yes, I'm going to be answering the questions I've been getting on Instagram first. So if I'm being totally honest, I'm going to ignore the chat for a while. So you can be throwing questions in the chat. I'm not seeing them because I've gotten about 100 questions through Instagram that I have to get through first. So you're welcome to keep throwing your questions in the chat. I'm not looking at them. So you might just wait, right? Like wait till I get to the topic of your question and then throw them in there. So I'm going to start with a few basic things. First, I'm going to say this a million times. I do not know what score you need to pass the AP test. No one does. The College Board doesn't know. We don't know because the tests are graded relative to each other. So they will have to wait and see. They will read like a bunch of essays, like 1,000 essays for each prompt. And then they will decide, okay, what's reasonable to expect for this prompt? This prompt seemed to be harder. So I guess we'll be a little more lenient on evidence, or we'll be stricter over here on context. Literally no one in the world knows what score will correlate to passing on the AP test. We just don't know. I do feel confident that like a 6 or higher is pretty solid. Like a 6 or higher is a really good score. I don't know what it correlates to, so stop asking. And I'm saying this like with love, but like I've gotten that question a million times, and every time everyone has said, we don't know, right? Second, as much as I would like to, I cannot score your practice DBQs. I've gotten a ton of requests to score your practice DBQ, and I'm so glad that you trust me. I literally don't have time. I'm still, like right after this live, I'm going to work with my own students at Griffin School in Austin. I'm working with them on reviewing. I'm trying to grade their essays. I'm trying to run around with a 3-year-old. So as much as I genuinely would like to be able to give you that feedback, I can't. So like, sorry. A few other kind of things to get out of the way. If you're having trouble opening a file on my website, so if you're going to my website, antisocialstudies.org, and it's not giving you access, that's probably because you're using your school email. So a lot of school districts don't let you as a student access like unknown Google Drives. And so I literally can't give you access. My inbox is like full of requests for access that I can't give because it's up to your school district. So use your personal email. If you're trying to access files on my website, it's way better to use your personal email. You should be able to get in just fine. And then if it's a document, just make a copy of it, and then you can edit it all you want. And lastly, if you have like really specific questions about parts of the rubric, I've made a video for each of them. So like if you have a really specific question about what is context and what does it look like, or how is context different from outside evidence, I literally have a video on my YouTube called Context versus Outside Evidence. So I'm not going to be able to go through like the whole rubric in a ton of depth right now, but that's because I've already done it. So go again, subscribe to my YouTube page, and then go and look at those videos where I break down the rubric. And I show you examples, I bring up documents and hip them for you. So if you have really in-depth questions about like, I still don't understand HIP or evaluating the sources, go watch my YouTube video on that, because hopefully that will give you some more clarity. Okay, so like I said, I'm addressing my Instagram questions first. So like not looking at the chat, I love y'all, but I'm not reading it. So you can ask questions, but I'm going through the people that messaged me on Instagram. I had about 100 or more, and I'm organizing them in kind of the order that you'll see them on the test. So I'm gonna start with like your notes and the prompts, then I'm gonna go to thesis and documents, then I'm gonna answer questions about HIP, outside evidence, context, and then I'll get to like, a few people have asked about like worst case scenarios, like what if I don't know the prompt or whatever. I'll get to those at the end. Okay, here we go. Notes and resources. Can you have notes open on another tab? Yes, you definitely can. This is an open note test. The College Board has said that it's not cheating. So you can have your notes, you can have, I don't have mine, but you can have your textbook out. You can also have, if you have a Google Doc where you've been taking notes all year or for the last few weeks, you can have that open. Here's the only thing that you can't have open is anything collaborative. So this is the really important part, because some people might accidentally do this. If you have a Google Doc and maybe you and some friends have been working on notes together as you've been reviewing, make sure to download your own copy of that so that when you're going during the test, you're not going to a Google Doc that is shared with other people that are also taking the test. That's all of a sudden cheating, because now you're both in that Google Doc and can in theory communicate. So again, you can have your notes open. I would suggest, if you don't want to worry about it too much, to just, if you do have digital notes or Google Docs or whatever, just for test day, download them and save them onto your computer, just so you're having to use up less internet too, right? Just so that you have them offline, and then you don't even have to worry about them accidentally sending you to some website or something. So yes, you can have your notes up and out, all that good stuff. You can listen to music. You just can't collaborate. You can't ask for help from other people. You can't go to sites where people can like interact with each other. Please God, stay off of social media for that hour. Do not get on social media. That will get you in trouble. Okay. What about the internet? Yeah, you can use the internet. The College Board has said you can use the internet, but I would be really, really careful because you don't want to accidentally end up on a site that is collaborative that you didn't mean to or realize. So what I've been telling my students is that if the question can be answered by Google, like meaning if you can type in what you're looking for and you'll get the answer without having to even click on anything, then that's a great use of the internet for this test. If you have to click on an article, you don't know what you're talking about and you should stop. Like you should just move on and talk about another document, find another piece of outside evidence. Because a lot of students from last week have told us that they ran out of time because they got kind of bogged down. They got really excited about being able to use the internet or go into their notes. And they spent so much time trying to figure out like one piece of evidence that they missed out on a lot of other stuff. So again, let's say you're writing an essay and you can't remember, you're like, shoot, what was the guy's name? He was like the gold guy that went and, caused Egypt's economy to bankrupt itself. What was his name? You can Google that and it'll pop up Mansa Musa and you go, right. And then you talk about Mansa Musa. That's a great use of the internet. Anything else where you're just like, let's say you're like, I don't know any African kings, and you just Google African kings and start skimming, that's not going to be good. It's not going to end well. So just don't waste your time with that. Okay. Let's see. So prompts. Okay. Will there be different prompts? Yes. Based on last week's like other AP history tests, there were at least 4 different prompts. And then within that, there are different sets of documents. So you and a friend might get the same prompt, but you might have gotten 5 different documents each. That's unfair. No, it's not. I promise it's not unfair. And I say that as a grader. I am an AP grader. I'm one of the people that might be reading your essay. And so I promise it works out fair. I can get into the details if you really care, but basically as a grader, I will spend my whole week this summer grading just one prompt and one set of documents, meaning my whole world will be that one prompt. So I'm only going to compare your essay to other people who had that same prompt. So if you compare with your friend after the test and you're like, shoot, yours was easier than mine, don't worry about it, because if there is a prompt that ends up being easier, and the College Board is like, wow, a lot of people are doing a lot more on this essay, they might just kind of have a little bit higher expectations. They're still going to they use a lot of math that I don't understand to make sure that it works out fairly. So don't worry about it. Okay. A few other questions about prompts that people have asked me to guess the prompts. No, I mean, I've posted on Instagram, like if I were the College Board, some prompts I would ask. I put in 1 or 2 that are like a super huge time period, like over 1200 to 1900. I honestly don't think it'll be that vast. That'd be a lot, but I do think probably they might go across 2 different time periods since this is the whole test. So I do think you can expect to maybe see questions that ask about, changes over time from 1450 to 1900, right? That cover 2 time periods instead of just 1. I also feel like if let's say there's going to be 4 prompts, I feel like it's likely that most of those prompts will come from like 1400 or later, but I do feel like at least one of those prompts will be from 1200 to 1450. So you still need to study it. So yeah, do with that what you will. How specific will the prompts be? Someone gave the example of like, will it be like evaluate Indian responses to the British in the 19th century? I don't think it will be that specific. What it will do is it will probably either give you like a specific region, but then maybe a broader theme and a broader time period. So it might be like evaluate how, I don't know, state building in Asia changed from 1450 to 1900. So it's like, yeah, it's specifically asking about kind of Asia and about state building, but you have a broader time period, and like Asia's still broad. You can talk about China, you can talk about India, the Middle East is part of Asia. Or they might give you maybe a broader theme or a broader region, maybe even the whole world, but then like one specific time period. So I think that typically the prompts have 3 things. They typically have a topic, state building or religion or whatever. They typically have a region, and they typically have a time period. I think at least 1 or 2 of those will be pretty specific, and then the other 1 or 2 will be broader to allow you to bring in the evidence you know. That's what all the essay questions for this new AP class have been, is they've been broad enough that you aren't forced into talking about like one event for the whole DBQ. So I've been getting a lot of questions from people of like, can you explain the Meiji Restoration? Or can you explain the Protestant Reformation and its impact on blah, blah, blah? And like, don't worry about it, right? Don't worry about it, because like worst case, you might get one document that references the Meiji Restoration, but you're not going to get an entire DBQ. Well, I shouldn't say this. This is going to come back to bite me if someone does get one on the Meiji Restoration. But what you might get is you might get an essay on like industrialization, and then one document might relate to the Meiji Japan, but you most likely will not get a whole DBQ about literally one event in world history. If so, I'll go fight the College Board myself, because that doesn't seem like a fair test. They've already told us they want the prompts and they want the tests to still be global, which means they're probably not going to force you into being like, talk about South Africa from 1850 to 1899. Like that's too specific. Okay, understanding the prompt. How do I understand the prompt? I mean, that's a big question, right? Because if you don't understand the prompt, you kind of can't do any of the other stuff. Although actually that's not quite true. The biggest thing is to identify keywords. So again, identify what I call the parameters of the prompt. So again, identify the topic or topics. So evaluate the role of religion in states. That's the topic, religion in states. Identify the region in Afro-Eurasia. Okay. And then identify the time period from 1200 to 1450. That's now the parameters of your prompt. And so that's what you have to like, those are the lanes you have to stay in when you're using the documents. But of course the documents will already be within that lane. And it's also the lane you have to stay in for additional evidence. I've gotten probably 30 questions that are the same question, which is, does outside evidence have to be from the same time period or the same region? Yes, it does, because it's evidence for your argument. So it has to still relate to the argument you're making and the question that you're being asked. So if you're asked about religion in the state in Afro-Eurasia from 1200 to 1450, you have to talk about religion and state and only in Afro-Eurasia. So you can't talk about the Aztecs from 1200 to 1450. So you can't talk about the Protestant Reformation because it's after that time. Those things could be context. The Aztecs or the Protestant Reformation or whatever could be context because they're zooming out from the prompt. But your evidence, whether it's from a document or it's your own evidence, has to still be within the parameters of the prompt. If they don't give you one of those parameters, if they don't give you a region, cool, literally the world is your oyster. You can talk about any part of the world that you want, right? But if they do give you a region, then you have to stay within that region. Out of the 10 points, the only point in the rubric where you should leave the parameters of the prompt, like the time period, the region, whatever, is context. And so that also means if you're going to hip the document and talk about the historical context of the document, those are the only times you should be going outside the region or outside the time period of the prompt. Okay, I did a whole video about context versus outside evidence that goes into a lot more detail with examples. Okay, a few people asked about the wording of the prompt. Like a lot of people are freaking out about like evaluate the extent versus analyze. I'll be honest, they're not actually that different. Like don't freak out about that. Like they're really not that different. Let's say you got a question that said, evaluate the extent to which religions impacted states. Then you're basically putting it on a spectrum. You're saying it did impact states, it didn't impact states, or it kind of did and it kind of didn't. Evaluate means put it on a spectrum. You can be like 100% yes, 0%, or like somewhere in the middle. If it says analyze the connection between religion and state, or analyze the role of religions on states, you're kind of doing the same thing. Like, I feel like everyone's freaking out about evaluate and analyze, and like, don't worry, just tell me about it, right? If it's asking you about religion and state from 1200 to 1450, just tell me about the relationship between those two. Typically, right? I mean, if you want to get really nitpicky, evaluate means like, evaluate is a little bit higher level thinking, which means you're really saying like, you're kind of grading it. You're saying like, whoa, it really did, but here it really didn't. But that's kind of the same as analyze, right? Analyze is just saying religion impacted states in this way, but they didn't have a big impact in this way. So don't really freak out about that. I've also had a lot of questions about people being like, how do you identify the historical thinking skill that's being asked? That's from old DBQs. We're not doing that anymore. So the prompts, like used to in previous years on old DBQs, there was a specific historical thinking skill. So like the essay would be a causation essay, and it would say something like evaluate the causes of, or it would be a change over time essay. That's not anymore. So if you've been practicing with that, that's totally fine, but that's not how the prompts will be this year. And that's good. What that means is that you'll get a broader prompt. So let's say instead of getting compare the role of religion in state between the Americas and Afro-Eurasia, you could get that one, in which case you say, here's how they were similar, here's how they were different. More likely though, you'll get like evaluate the role of religion in state in the Americas or in Afro-Eurasia or whatever, and then you can decide which skill you want to use to answer that question. So you could talk about, well, it changed over time. At first it was this way, then it was this way. Or you could talk about like, well, here's what the role was, and then you talk about why, which is sort of causation. Or you could compare. You can say, well, in this part of the region, it worked this way, but in this part, it worked a different way. So again, you could maybe get an essay that's like compare or evaluate causes, in which case, like the word is in the prompt, so you'll know what they want you to do. But for the most part, they tend to be now going a little bit more broad with like the verb, like what they actually want you to do. They're just going to give you the topic, the region, the time period, so that then you can pick the way you want to organize your argument. So when in doubt, just like talk about it. Like I feel like when in doubt, if it's like, let me think of a different example. If it's like evaluate how trade changed hierarchies in the Americas, then be like, okay, what do I know about trade in the Americas after 1450? Well, Columbian exchange, conquest, that sort of thing. What do I know about social hierarchies? The caste system, slavery, rising middle class, blah, blah, blah. And then just kind of tell them that stuff. Worst case, just say, well, this trade happened and then these hierarchies happened. And obviously what they really want is for you to make that connection. But worst case, if you're like, I don't actually really know what they're asking, pick out the keywords of the prompt, trade and hierarchy or whatever it is, and just like at least tell us what you know about that during that time period, right? Okay, so that's the prompts. I'm going to glance at the chat really quickly. If anyone has any questions about the prompts or like what resources you can use, throw it in the chat. Everything else I'm going to ignore because I'm going to get to those later. You don't need a conclusion. A conclusion can be helpful to like restate your thesis just in case. But yeah, the years you have to study are 1200 and 1900. This test is on 1200 and 1900. So some of you are asking good questions that are not about resources or thesis. So do your DBQs have to sound good? No, they don't. You just have, it's a checklist. That rubric is a checklist. Did you do it, right? Is the prompt definitely going to be to what extent? I think it's likely that some of them will be, but I like those questions. Those questions are great because they give you a lot of room to make your argument. So if it says to what extent, if you see the word extent, literally just think of a spectrum. You're going to put your answer either way over here, or somewhere in the middle. The better answer is somewhere in the middle, by the way. That's complex. So if it says, to what extent did indigenous people resist European expansion? You're either going to say they totally did, they totally didn't, or sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't. If it says, evaluate the extent to which the Enlightenment impacted the Americas, it totally impacted it, it didn't at all, sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. Like extent questions are easy because you literally have kind of those three options. And again, the best option typically is like the middle option where you're showing like you know a little bit of both. Resources. So one of the resources people have talked about is the CED. That's the course exam and description. I have a simplified version on my website, Anti-Social Studies. Yeah, that is literally the document where the College Board is like literally tells you the whole course. Let me share my screen really quickly because I think this is really valuable, especially for people who are like freaking out about like, what if I forget this one thing or whatever? And don't worry, I'm not like, I know how you feel. I took AP tests too, and like, I totally know how you feel. I'm just telling you like some of your worries are unfounded. You don't have to worry about memorizing a bunch of stuff or having like 3 body paragraphs or whatever. It doesn't really matter on this test. So this is my website that I'm showing you. If you go, it's antisocialstudies.org. If you go to WHAP resources, AP World Exam resources, you will see this page. You've seen my note. Use your personal email when trying to access these documents because a lot of school emails don't let you, and I can't do anything about that. So I have over here, these are like the PowerPoints and the recordings of the cram sessions I've done the last few days. I also have the 3 things you should have when you take the AP test. And number 1 is the CED. That's the course exam and description. I've made a simplified version that just looks a little bit nicer, but this wording is completely from the College Board. So this is what the College Board gives teachers at the beginning of the year to tell us what we need to teach you. And it goes into literally everything that could show up on the test. So 1.1 says like, you should be able to explain the effects of Chinese cultural traditions on East Asia over time. And then it tells you, by proving that Chinese cultural traditions, including filial piety, continued and they influenced neighboring regions. Guess what? That's a thesis statement, right? Or that's a topic sentence. So if you got a question from 1200 to 1450 about culture spreading over time, go in here, do Control F, look for culture, maybe leave off the E, so look for culture first. Cool, oh, agriculture, that's not helpful. But look at cultural and see, oh, cultural traditions, they spread to other places. And now like you have from the College Board a topic sentence that you can use, assuming it relates to the documents, right? So this CED is really helpful as a starting point to at least get the basics down. It's not going to really help you like understand the documents because the documents aren't in here, but it does help you understand like the basic developments that are occurring. And so this is a document that you should probably have downloaded. You can also just get the PDF straight from the College Board. Just Google AP World CED and it'll come up. But again, so for those of you who are really worried about like, what if I don't know anything? Okay, let's say you have some keywords from the prompt and one of the keywords is about hierarchy, then search hierarchy and like go through it and see what you find, right? Or maybe it says something like elites. And so then you go through and search for the word elite and see what happens over time. See what happens throughout and find at least some statements to get you started. Okay. So with that being said, let's move on to timing. So you get 45 minutes to write plus 5 minutes to upload. This is really, really important. You are still going to be able to keep typing when the 5 minutes starts. So like when you log in tomorrow and it starts, your timer will say 50 minutes, right? Because they're including the 5 minutes to upload. So we'll say 50 minutes and you'll start reading and writing. When it gets down to only 5 minutes left, the timer will turn red. And that will be when you need to start uploading. But you're going to be typing on like a Google Doc or something else. You actually can't type into the College Board's test website. It's literally just for seeing the prompt and uploading or pasting your answer. So you'll be on some of their documents. So you can keep typing, but you shouldn't. Because last week, a lot of students were not able to submit their answer because they started trying to submit too late. They were like, they only had 30 seconds left. And then they tried to submit and there were all these issues. Now the College Board has put in a thing where if that happens to you, an error message will pop up and it'll give you an email where you have to immediately go and like send your essay with your ID and stuff to that email. But the point is that you need to be watching the timer because it's not going to stop you from typing. It's just going to say on the site, you have 5 minutes left, start uploading. And so you need to make sure you're doing that. If it were me, I would right now pull out my phone, set an alarm for 45 minutes into my test. So whatever time zone you're in Austin, we're taking it at 1 p.m. So I've had all of my students set an alarm for 1:45 that will go off and say, start uploading your answer, just in case you lose track of the timer. A few other people have asked about like how much time should you be spending on different things? I really feel like out of the 45 minutes, you need to start writing after 15 minutes, no later than that. So what that means is like, you don't need to use all the documents, and I really don't think you should. I don't think you should use all 5 documents. I promise it's not worth your time. You can get a 9 out of 10 and only use 2 documents. Now you should use 3 then to be careful. But so if you're at 10 or 15 minutes in and you've read through 3 documents, but you haven't gotten to the other 2, just start, and just include those 3 documents for now. And then if you have time at the end, once you've figured everything else out, if then you want to go back and try to understand the other 2 documents and add them in for that extra point, great. But like, as long as you have 3 documents ready that you can like incorporate to your answer in some way, they don't even have to be grouped. But if you have 3 documents that you're like, okay, I understand how to relate this to the prompt, then start writing. Don't spend a ton of time figuring out the 4th and the 5th document. And so what I've been doing, I wrote a DBQ. I posted the video earlier today. I wrote the practice DBQ the College Board released, and you'll see what I do is I skipped a document. I got to one document and was like, this seems too complicated. I'm not going to look at it right now. And I never came back to it. And then there was another document that I kind of understood, but then I couldn't figure out how to relate it to my argument. So I didn't include it. I only used 3 documents at first because those are the 3 that made sense to me the most. So again, this is not about writing a perfect essay. This is about getting as many points as possible. And so again, once you feel like you understand 3 documents and how to relate them, start writing. Then maybe come back later, reread the prompt, skim through the other documents, and think if you can add anything else in. But that's only after you've tried outside evidence, context, HIP, all those other things. Okay. So we have, I also want to mention that, again, if you're just joining me, this recording will be posted on my YouTube channel. I also have a ton of videos where I break down each part of the rubric. I have a video I posted this morning of me writing a DBQ live. I gave myself 30 minutes to kind of be equivalent to y'all's 45. I'm going to be going live on my Instagram later tonight to talk about some last minute review with Marco Learning. So if you haven't already subscribed to my Instagram, it's Anti-Social Studies, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And you can go and find a lot of those videos where I've gone in depth about the different parts of the rubric. Okay, so going back down, let's see, we talked about the thesis. Oh, no, we haven't talked about the thesis. Okay, the thesis. Can it be too specific? No, it can't. But you shouldn't use a document or bring in additional evidence in your thesis. You'll waste it because you can't double dip. So what that means is like, if you use a document, but you're using it in your thesis, it just counts as your thesis point. So you can't get 2 points for like one thing in your essay. So again, your thesis should be pretty specific. By the end of your thesis, I should be able to look at the 5 docs and the prompt and read just your thesis and basically know exactly what you're going to argue. So you don't want to be too general. You don't want to be like, religion did impact trade. How? How did it impact trade? So religion impacted trade by developing diasporic communities where religious minorities facilitated trade, and trade spread religion by allowing missionaries to travel, right? So you want to like say something specific, but notice you don't want to go into anything super, super specific, or don't go into a document yet, like in your intro. The other thing about the thesis, how many arguments do you have to have? Just one, like literally one or more. And so like you could have one body paragraph that's like your one argument. So your whole argument could be trade allowed religion to spread. Boom. That's your thesis. And then that becomes your one body paragraph is just using the documents to support that. Typically you see 2. Typically most people do 2 topics. So they might say religion helped spread trade and trade helped spread religion. And then you have 2 body paragraphs, but you can have 1 body paragraph. You can have 10 body paragraphs. You'll run out of time, but you get the point. There's no point for organization. It doesn't matter. Grouping documents is helpful. It's also kind of the way toward complexity, and having a clear topic sentence is pretty critical. So if you're concerned, a lot of you are asking about like addressing the document versus using the document. One of the easiest ways to help yourself with that is to have a clear topic sentence. Because if you just like launch into discussing your document, I as the reader am like, what are they talking about? Like, I don't know what their argument is yet. So they're talking about the document, but I don't know what they're relating it to. If you have just a simple topic sentence first, where you say, religious minorities often facilitated trade, and then you launch into the document about the Jewish diasporic community or whatever, now it's way more clear to me how that document relates to your argument already. So again, if you're concerned about like just addressing or describing a document versus using it, one of the key things there is like a clear topic sentence, so the reader knows where you're going. right? If your thesis is wrong, does it affect other things? It's a really good question. So if your thesis is wrong, or if your thesis like does not actually reflect what you end up talking about at all, there are still some points you can get. You can get a point for addressing two documents, like accurately describing them. That can still get you a point. I mean, I kind of think in theory you could hit those documents, like maybe. But yeah, I mean, really the thesis is pretty critical. They might still give you like an evidence point if you bring up some evidence that is relevant to the prompt, even if it is not connected to your thesis. So the point is like, you should just try, right? The point is that there's no part of this rubric that takes points away. There's no part of this rubric that gives you negative points. And so with that, like, even if you're not sure, you're like, I think this is good evidence, but I'm not sure. Put it in there. Worst case, they'll say, no, sorry, but you won't lose the points you've already gained. So use the whole 45 minutes. I will, if any of my students come back tomorrow and tell me like, yeah, I had like 10 minutes left, I will murder them. Like, I will just be furious because it's like, just put more things down. Don't do an info dump. Don't just start rambling. Like, the graders are like seasoned teachers and professors. We can see through fluff like from a mile away, but like, keep giving us more information, because it might be that your first piece of evidence didn't make sense, but then your second one did, and now you get that point. Okay, I'm going to talk about HIP in a second, so just pause on that. Again, grouping can't be wrong. There's no way that grouping can be wrong, like Lauren's asking that question. It might just be that one of the documents you've misunderstood. So you might say that like, religion spread trade, and you have one document that relates and that makes sense, and you have another document that you get wrong and doesn't make sense. There's no point for grouping, so that doesn't matter. You just won't get credit for using that document. That's why you should definitely at least use 3. That way, if you misinterpret one, you'll still have the 2 that you need. So I would suggest you use 3 or 4 documents max. Okay, so that's the thesis. Okay, outside evidence. Everyone, listen to me again. I've gotten this question so many times, and I already talked about it a little bit earlier. Again, I did a whole YouTube video on this. I think the word that throws people off is outside. So let's say the prompt is evaluate methods of imperialism evaluate European methods of imperialism from 1750 to 1900. Okay, those are your parameters. You're talking about European. Now, they can be going out and colonizing other places, but it's European methods related to imperialism in this time period, 1750 to 1900. Okay. Context zooms out of one of these things. So context either talks about European methods of imperialism before 1700. So you zoom out of the time period. Or it could talk about non-European methods of imperialism in this time period. Talk about Japan building an empire and how they did it, or talk about some other, the Ottomans, whatever. Or you could zoom out of the methods of imperialism and just talk about what else is happening in Europe during this time period that impacts imperialism, the Industrial Revolution. So context means you zoom out. So again, you have to identify like the main rules of the document. This has to be about religion in the Americas after 1450. And so then context, you zoom out of one of those. What was religion like in the Americas before 1450? Or what was happening with American states after 1450 that impacted religion? Or what was happening with religion around the world besides the Americas? Maybe the Protestant Reformation that leads to the Catholic Church wanting to convert natives, whatever. Now, outside evidence has to fit the rules of the prompt. So if you're asked to evaluate European methods of imperialism after 1750, you'll have the documents that will talk about social Darwinism, and you'll have a document that will talk about the civilizing mission. An additional piece of evidence still has to relate to all those 3 things. So you could talk about the need for raw materials, right? That was a method, and they basically used industrialization to build empires, and then those empires fueled that industrialization. It's still related to Europe and kind of ideologies of kind of industrialization and capitalism in the time period we're talking about. Or if you're being asked about religion in the Americas after 1450, a piece of additional evidence would be talking about, let's say you have a document about converting natives to Catholicism, and you have another document about Puritans in New England. A piece of additional evidence could be slaves adopting Christianity. That is still in the Americas related to religion after 1450. I hope that makes sense. So again, context, you're kind of zooming out. Additional evidence still has to fit the parameters. Here's the cool thing though. Let's say you kind of mess up and you get that wrong and you think you're doing additional evidence, but you actually talk about a different region. Cool, then you'll probably get the context point. So still try it, right? Try it and put it out there. A lot of times I have students that'll be like, oh, I thought that was context. And I'm like, no, it was actually outside evidence. So you don't have to tell us which point you're going for. Just put it on the page and we will do our best to give you points. Okay, let's see. A lot of people are concerned on like, what if the prompt really is like from 1200 to 1900? Because again, the test stops at 1900. I mean, I don't think it'll be that. I put one of those on my Instagram just to like get us thinking about it. But in general, that actually means like, you can talk about, there's so many things that you can talk about. There's people concerned about, what if my prompt starts in 1200? How do I do context? Well, remember, time period is only one of the ways you can zoom out and have context. So you can also talk about like other parts of the world or other things happening during that time that relate to it. So let's say the prompt is about like evaluate the impact of trade routes from 1200 to 1450. Your context could be about pre-1200, the rise of trade, if you know that, but it also could be about other things happening in that time period that have an impact on trade routes, because you're basically being asked then about the effect of trade routes. You could then contextualize with the cause of trade routes. You could talk about innovations in lateen sails and camel saddles that led to larger trade routes. And then your thesis is, and here's how those trade routes impacted this time period. So again, context doesn't just have to be time period. It doesn't mean if your essay starts in 1200, the context has to be from pre-1200. That's just one way. You can also talk about other things happening in that time period that impact your argument. Okay. Let's see. A few more things about outside evidence. Does it need to be separate from the document? Yes, it has to be its own separate point, but it can be from the same like state as a document. So let's say you have one of the practice TBQs I saw, or maybe I can't remember, is about industrialization. And one of the documents shows the Meiji Restoration, and it shows Japan with like coal going way up and train tracks going way up and whatever. So you would use that to say Japan was industrializing. But like, if you also know more about the Meiji Restoration, if you also know, like, in addition to building, infrastructure, they were also modernizing their education to train those workers. And they expanded education to all people and to girls and boys to create like a bigger labor force. That would be an additional piece of evidence because it can stand on its own. So the key part about evidence, if it's connected to a document in any way, is like, could you take away your discussion of the document completely and this evidence would still make sense? If so, then you're good. But if it like really is just sort of like a fun fact about the document and you kind of take the document away and it's like, what's the point of that? Then that's not. So again, it doesn't mean that if there's a document about the casta system in Latin America, that now you can't talk anymore about the casta system. It just needs to be its own separate thing that again could exist on its own and still make sense. So is it fine to paraphrase and summarize the outside evidence? Yeah, I mean, you have to be specific, but obviously you're gonna be paraphrasing or summarizing because you're not referencing like a specific document. You're not quoting anything. And by the way, you really shouldn't quote the documents as much as possible. You kind of don't get points for anything in quotes because all you're doing is just like saying what the documents already say. So you should, as much as possible, be putting things into your own words. But evidence does need to be specific enough. It can't just be like, Japan also encouraged education. It's like, well, I mean, kind of everywhere sort of encouraged. Like, what does encouraged mean, right? You want to say something specific by expanding it to girls and boys, or by creating state-sponsored public schools, or something that's like a little bit more specific. Let's see. You do not need a counter argument. You don't need a counter argument. I used to be one of those teachers that forced everyone to have a counter argument because the old DBQ kind of made you do that. You don't need to do that anymore, but it can get you complexity. So like if you know how to do a counter argument and you've been learning that all year, do it, but you don't need one. You can have the simple answer. Go watch me write the practice DBQ that I posted this morning. I literally like wrote my thesis and used 3 documents, and I think I had written 5 sentences. And I had already had like a thesis and 2 points. So I'd already had a 3, and I'd literally written 5 sentences, and it was super straightforward. It was like some resistance was violent, some resistance was not. Like, it does not have to be a super complicated argument, because the most important thing, like, complexity is 1 point, but your argument counts for a lot of others in other ways. And so it's better to have a simple argument that the reader understands than to try for a complex argument that's so convoluted I can't tell what you're talking about. So do not worry or stress about a counter argument. If one comes to you, if you're like, well, these rebellions or this resistance was violent, blah, blah, blah. However, there are a few exceptions that were nonviolent. That's great. Those are then your 2 body paragraphs. But if you just want to go with the simple answer and be like, resistance was violent, and just talk about violence, fine, right? What this test is really testing you on is like, can you make an argument and then prove it? That's all it's testing. There's not one right answer to the prompt. There are many right answers. They just want to know, can you assert something? So can you make your own argument, and then can you support it with evidence and with documents? So make it as simple as you want. Okay. Okay, so let's go through. Some people are worried about skimming the documents. Like, how do you skim them quickly? Here's my biggest tip. Again, identify the keywords in the prompt. So again, let's say your prompt is about the relationship between religion and trade routes. What you should think about before you start skimming the documents is like, okay, in the documents, I'm looking for stuff related to one of those 2 things. There's gonna be a lot of stuff in the middle that won't relate to either of them, and I can just skim that really quickly. But you wanna think about, what are some keywords related to religion that I might be looking for? Missionary, monk, prayer, belief, God, temple, church, whatever. And then what are some words related to trade? Merchant, tax, buy, whatever, right? And so then you go to the documents. The other thing, first read the sourcing information. First read where it tells you what the document is. Because what you'll see is on that example, you might see a document that's like, a Christian missionary describing his visit to Jerusalem. That's so great, because now you know the whole thing's about religion. So you don't have to worry about that. Everything's gonna be about religion. It's a Christian missionary in Jerusalem. Now you just have to skim the document for words related to trade. So skim, believe, holy God, great God, Jesus son, blah, 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 tax. Whoa, tax. Okay, I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna read that whole phrase or that whole sentence. Because again, if you know the whole document is about one part of the prompt, then you're really just skimming it for something related to the other part that you're trying to bring up. Or again, if it's just like, evaluate indigenous resistance to European imperialism, okay, think about keywords that relate to the word resistance. Rebel, fight, resist, no, decline, blah, blah, blah. And then skim the document for those words and then stop and read around that in a lot of detail. So I hope that makes sense. But like the most important thing is to spend at least a minute really thinking about the prompt and really thinking about those keywords in the prompt. So like, you don't really have to worry about the time period yet, because the documents will all be from within the time period and within the region. Whatever the key word is, whatever they're asking you to talk about, if it's social hierarchy, then you know you're skimming the document looking for words like elite, low, high, poor, rich, above, below, like whatever, right? And so you kind of skim. And if you see a political document that's like, dearest your majesty of blah, 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 of the state, blah, 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 Daenerys Targaryen of the house, whatever, you just like skim, skim, skim until you get to a word that says something like middle class. And then you're like, ah, that's really related to like the topic I'm looking for. So I hope that's helpful. Can you get partial credit for just using one doc? No, you have to use at least 2 to get any of those document points. Do you have to group docs? No, you don't have to group the docs. It's helpful. I think it looks better than talking about them each on their own. But the thing I really would suggest you do is you have a clear topic sentence. So even if one body paragraph is literally just about one document, which is fine, make sure you have a clear topic sentence so the grader knows what you're about to be talking about. So people are asking some great questions that I addressed earlier on. So just as a quick reminder for those of you who've been joining, this video will be posted on YouTube. I also have my notes on these different questions and answers, and I'm going to be posting that on my website, antisocialstudies.org, right after. So if you have a question that I didn't get to, or if you have a question about the thesis or something kind of earlier on, please make sure to check that out on my website and see if I answer your question there, because I maybe have. Okay, hip. This is the last part. This is the part that rightfully so is difficult. So here's the one thing I will say. If you just are not good at hip, then like, don't do hip. Do the other stuff. Make sure you have some outside evidence in there. Maybe use 4 documents, right? Like if you're just like, I don't get hip, it's way better for you to like say, I'm just, okay, not even gonna worry about it. I'm gonna shoot for a 7, right? I'm gonna not worry about it. I might try hip if I have time, but I'm gonna make sure that I use 4 documents now. And I'm gonna make sure that I put in at least 2, maybe 3 pieces of additional evidence just in case. Like I'm gonna make sure that I try to get those other points to make up for not doing hip. But in general, hip just is wanting, like, hip is actually pretty straightforward once it like clicks for you. So hopefully it'll click right now. The College Board just wants to know that you understand that the documents are not pure fact. That's all they want from hip. They want you to know, like, think about, you hip all the time, by the way. Think about if you go on social media and you see a celebrity and they are posting some like amazing photo of themselves drinking this fancy coffee. You know, you're like, oh, they're probably selling that coffee. I bet they're getting money for that coffee. So like they're talking about how great it is, but then it says sponsored below and you're like, oh, okay, well the purpose is to sell us coffee. So like maybe they don't like that coffee at all, but they're just saying it so they get money. That's hip. That's you hipping. You do it all the time in your life. It's just not taking things at face value. So it's the same thing. If you get a letter from an African king to a Portuguese king, like, and he says, we highly respect the Portuguese and we love you being involved in our kingdom. Do they really? No, probably not. But they also don't want to start a war with Portugal. So they're going to be maybe nicer than they actually would want to be. So HIP just shows in general that you can read between the lines and that you can like understand that not everything in the document is pure fact. And you can do that in a lot of ways. You could talk about the like historical context of the document. So let's say you had a document based in British India in 1860, and it's a governor talking about weapons. We need to get weapons here and here and here. Well, it'll make more sense if you realize that, hey, this document is like 1 or 2 years after the Sepoy Rebellion. So like that makes sense. He's scared, right? That he's just gone through this massive rebellion that challenged the British power in India. So yeah, he's like especially concerned with guns right now. It's not just that he's like gun happy, although he probably is. Or the intended audience or the purpose. A lot of times those meld together. So it's fine. You can mix and match. You don't have to like just stick with one of the HIPs or the HAPs. I say intended audience because sometimes that's a little more clear. Some people say the audience is students trying to answer DBQ. And it's like, it's not about you. Columbus wasn't writing for you. Columbus was writing to the king or whatever. And so intended audience and purpose sometimes meld together, and that's totally fine. So again, the point of HIP is just like, can you read between the lines? Can you understand why there might be parts of the document that are a little bit questionable? And then I got a few other good questions about that. Does that then undermine the document? Are you then saying like, well, shoot, if that document's not reliable, I can't use it at all? No, of course you can use it. So like that Instagram post is still useful, right? We could still write an essay about how celebrities became, how celebrities used corporate endorsements to supplement their income. And we could prove it with that post. But we would also say, but like obviously they were sometimes supporting things that they didn't necessarily like just to get paid. Same thing with the letter from Columbus. You can still learn a lot from that letter, but you're learning a lot about his point of view. You're not learning about what literally happened necessarily. So it might, like you'll see a letter where Columbus will say, the natives were so happy to see us and they were so happy to give us gold and all these other things. I doubt they were that happy, right? I doubt they were that ecstatic to like give you gold when you had guns and all the horses and all these other things and they were terrified of you. So we can still learn something though. We can still learn something about that event. We're learning it though through Columbus's eyes. So again, that's all HIP is showing that you understand that. Where do you put HIP? You can put it anywhere. It makes the most sense, and readers normally expect it to come like after you use that document to support your argument, but it can come anywhere. Just and you can be blunt. So literally just say the point of view of document 1 is this, and that means that blah 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 blah, right? Does it have to relate to your argument? I mean, in an ideal world, yes, but the most important thing is that you have the and so. So you might say, the African king was writing this letter to the king of Portugal. You've identified the intended audience, but like, so what? So then you say, and so he was using more diplomatic language and was probably not entirely truthful about how happy he was to have the Portuguese involved in his country. However, right, he didn't want to get fully conquered. So he's going to be a little bit nicer than he maybe normally would have been. Right? So as long as you have that, I think typically you get the hip point. Now, if you can connect that hip back to your argument, that's like an opportunity for complexity. Okay, last few minutes, and then I have to get to my own classes review. So in 4 minutes, I have my own students that are going to be coming to my office hours to review. So I have 4 minutes left, a few miscellaneous things, grammar and spelling, don't worry about it. As long as we can tell what you're talking about, you're fine. What if you don't know the answer to the prompt? Go into the CED and look for it, right? That's that course exam and description that I have posted on my website. Again, it's right here. So if you were like, I have no idea what the prompt is asking about. Oh, what? If you're like, I have no idea what the prompt is asking about, but it talks about cultural diffusion, then open up this CED, which is the College Board's document, and type in diffusion and start looking and read some of these sentences and be like, oh, I remember talking about Buddhism spreading or whatever. Now make sure you're in the right time period, right? But if you like have no idea what the prompt is talking about, go into this document or go into your textbook and use the index and look up some of the key words and try to figure out what they're talking about. Another great resource that I've linked to on my website is Marco Learning. They have free unit study guides that are like 2 pages for each unit, and they have a lot, they're really dense. They have a lot of information in there. So again, if you get the prompt and you're like, I have no idea what they're talking about, pull up your digital resources, Control F or Command F, and look for some of the keywords to kind of jog your memory. But also remember, this is, I think, the point I want to leave you with. Every year, the DBQ is something a little weird, and that's on purpose. Every year, the College Board tries to pick a DBQ prompt that is something you might not have explicitly talked about, because the whole point is for you to use the documents to figure out the answer. So like, you're not necessarily supposed to know the answer right away. If you do, that's a bonus. But if you don't, that's correct, because the whole point is they're testing you on like, can you go into these documents and then apply those to come up with an answer? So if you see a prompt and you're like, oh crap, I don't know the answer to this, that's normal. That's how you're supposed to feel, right? Because then they want to know, okay, can you like scramble? Can you like, based on what you do know about history, can you go into the documents and figure it out? Okay, so if you get a question that you at first are like, I have no idea, sit back, take a deep breath, go into your notes, go into your CED, go into your unit study guides, whatever, find some of those keywords and like get yourself in that mindset. And then skim through the documents, because the documents are the answer. Like the documents are the answer to the question. And so if you're not sure what they're talking about, skim through the documents and you should be able to find, again, at least 2, ideally 3, to apply to your answer. Okay, so that's what I want to leave you with. Y'all are going to be fine. I've addressed a lot of these questions that a lot of y'all are asking right now about what does evaluate the extent mean. I addressed it earlier in the video. I'll also be posting my notes from this, all the questions and answers that I addressed. I'll be posting on my website. So antisocialstudies.org. Again, I'm getting a ton of questions about evaluate the extent to which. I addressed it earlier on, and I'm also going to put it, I have it in my notes right here. In short, evaluate the extent to which means put it on a spectrum. It did, it didn't, sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. That's the easiest way to think about it. You can find all of the resources that I've been using and I've been showing you on my website. So let me show you that one more time before I go. So my website is antisocialstudies.org. You go in, it's going a little slow. You go in and you go to WHAP resources, AP exam resources. It's not super organized because I've been frantically throwing things up here all week, but this is where you'll find everything. Please notice that I'm saying use your personal email when trying to access these documents. A lot of school emails don't let you open documents from strangers. And so they won't let you access it, and I can't do anything about it. So please try to use your personal email. That should work. And then you can make a copy of these documents and use them. This is where you'll see PowerPoints that I've done for my content cram sessions. This is where you'll see my version of the CED, the Marco Learning Study Guides. Down here for writing practice, here's the DBQ worksheet that I've used on my live DBQs. Here's an updated rubric that you can look at. Here are sample practice DBQs. I've written sample essays, but I've put them behind a paywall just for security's sake. So you have to pay $1 to get access to all of those, and I'm not sorry. Took a lot of time writing those essays. You can see some other practice activities, but honestly, like we're less than a day away. So I would just focus on big picture, making sure you know the rubric, making sure you know your strategy. What are you going to do? What are you going to focus on? And you'll do great. And the last thing is that, like, as much as I want you all to get 4s and 5s, if you don't, it's not a big deal. This is just one test. If you get a 4 or 5, that's awesome. If you get a 3, that's amazing. If you get a 1 or a 2, literally no one has to know except for you and your teacher. Like, you don't have to share that with anyone. You don't have to share it with colleges. And a lot of you are freshmen or sophomores. The point of AP World is to like help you figure out what an AP class looks like. And so you are already doing the work. And this is going to help you whether you pass tomorrow or you don't, which a lot of you are going to pass. This is going to help you in future years where you're kind of getting all this out on this first AP test. And then like next year, if you're a junior or a senior and you're taking a bunch more AP classes, you're going to feel so much more confident because you've already done it once. So take a deep breath. It's going to be over in 24 hours, one way or the other. And like this one test is actually not that important. Like, do your best and then let it go. So thank you so much for following me. Please subscribe to my YouTube. Please check out my videos on the specifics of the rubrics. If I wasn't able to answer your specific point, go check out my website where I'm going to post the notes for this kind of Q&A on there so you can look at them too. And good luck tomorrow. I think y'all are probably going to do great. And even if you don't, who cares? No one's going to know, right? So thank you so much for joining me. I don't know if I'll be able to go live again because I'm going to be trying to get my kids all ready before the test tomorrow. But if I can, I'll maybe pop into YouTube sometime tomorrow morning for a little bit of like a pump up session. So make sure you're subscribed so you can see if I go live anytime before the test. Also, tonight on Instagram, I'm going to be going live at 8/7 Central with Marco Learning, and we're going to do some kind of last minute review. So if you want more of my voice, which I'm sorry if you've probably been hearing my voice nonstop this week, plus Heimler's, go on Instagram, follow me at Anti-Social Studies and follow Marco Learning, and you'll see when we go live. And we're going to do kind of a Q&A, like last minute review for the AP exam tomorrow. Okay, good luck, y'all. You're going to be great. Thank you so much for joining me. Talk to you later.